The air had begun to chill, and the leaves rustled with the approach of autumn. As I stood behind the counter of my father's bakery, the question that had always nagged me resurfaced. Why do people celebrate Halloween on October 31st? I wasn't just any baker. I was Sean, a young man of 26 with an unusual physical presence. Towering above most, and blessed with a strength that often surprised those who knew me. I couldn't help but be curious about the origins of this curious holiday. My father's store, a quaint bakery nestled in the heart of a small, sleepy town, was known for its exquisite pastries and confections. But today, it was Halloween, and my thoughts were far from buttery croissants and flaky pies. My contemplation led me to unravel the twisted history of Halloween, a history steeped in darkness and mystery. The roots of this peculiar celebration traced back to pre-Christian times, an age when the land was cloaked in the lore of Celtic tribes. To them, October 31st marked the end of one year and the dawn of another. On this day, the Celts believed that the deity of death rose to power, summoning the souls of the departed. The ancient Celtic legend declared that Halloween was the night when the gates between the realms of the living and the dead swung wide open, allowing the souls of the departed to tread upon the earth. People of yore, terrified by the idea of encountering malevolent spirits, devised methods to fend off the otherworldly invaders. Their solution? Fire and revelry. The fiery flames were believed to act as a beacon, guiding lost souls to their rightful destination. In tandem, they adorned themselves in ghastly costumes to confound and bemuse the evil spirits, masking their true identities beneath gruesome visages. With such customs, the living hoped to drive away the specters that lurked in the shadows of Halloween. But as I stood in my father's bakery, I couldn't help but ponder the transformation of this ancient tradition. The Halloween I had known wasn't merely a night of bonfires and disguises. It had evolved into an opportunity for the truly sinister to shroud themselves among the ordinary folk, lurking in the shadows to enact their nefarious deeds. Over the years, I had witnessed the horrors of Halloween firsthand. It wasn't mere folklore or legend, but a night when the line between reality and the supernatural blurred. As I continued to reflect, I couldn't escape the memories that haunted me. My memory carried me back to the time when my world was as simple as the town we lived in. Back then, I was just a boy, living with my parents in a small town in the northern reaches of the country. The heart of our family lay in our humble bakery, just as it does today. My father was a hereditary baker, and our store was renowned in the tight-knit community that nestled amongst the hills. My childhood was marked by carefree days. I went to school, played with friends, and knew little of life's griefs or complexities. But a single man, an enigmatic figure, would cast a looming shadow over our tranquil town. He was a stranger, newly arrived, and the town's collective curiosity was piqued by his presence. In a small community where familiarity was the norm, the stranger's reticence and elusive nature sparked intrigue. He seldom ventured into the public eye, often retreating to the seclusion of his home. Speculations about his identity and purpose burgeoned, forming a labyrinth of rumors that snaked through our town like ivy on an old brick wall. Some believed he was a former gangster, seeking refuge in the quiet of our town, an attempt to escape the clutches of his criminal past. Others whispered that he was a clandestine operative, working for a shadowy agency whose very existence was hushed in secrecy. Then there were those who claimed he was a murderer, an alleged serial killer, evading the long arm of the law. As a young boy, I soaked up these whispered legends and nefarious tales with dread. The sinister aura that enveloped this enigmatic stranger etched itself deep into my psyche, manifesting as genuine fear. His image in my young mind was that of a malevolent and forbidding figure. I would have been content to never cross paths with him, to never look into the eyes of the man who had ignited the town's darkest fantasies. My father, on the other hand, had a way of seeing things differently. He'd chuckle, dismissing the hearsay as mere nonsense. He held the conviction that one's character was not defined by the chilling stories woven by idle tongues. For my father, the stranger was just another patron who had stepped into our bakery, seeking bread, pastries, and the warmth of our small-town hospitality. On an ordinary evening, as I trudged home along the meandering streets of our quiet town, I could not have foreseen the unsettling encounter that would leave an indelible mark on my life. This day was just like any other if it weren't for the constant chill of the coming fall. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to stretch from the town's very soul. As I walked along, immersed in my thoughts, my gaze wandered into an alley. A narrow passage between the weathered buildings. It was a place I rarely paid attention to, nor did anyone else in our town. Yet, it was there, behind a grimy dumpster, that my reality took a sudden and ominous turn. I halted in my tracks, my heart pounding, as I witnessed a man who defied any logical explanation. He stood concealed behind the dumpster, furtively observing someone or something down the alley. From my vantage point, he had not noticed me. I was hidden in the shadows. My curiosity warred, with an innate sense of dread that churned within me. The man's bizarre behavior set my nerves on edge. In a moment of sheer misfortune, my trembling hands betrayed me. A can of fizzy drink slipped from my grasp, hitting the cold, unforgiving ground with a resounding clang. The stranger, alert to the slightest sound, twitched and turned with an uncanny swiftness. His gaze, those eyes I can never forget, fell upon me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. His tall, imposing frame was shrouded in a long gray coat that billowed like a wraith in the night. His features, simultaneously Asian and European, marked him as a mestizo. A rugged countenance framed those eyes, eyes that held me captive. They were deep pools of darkness, unwavering in their intensity, and seemed to radiate an unsettling aura. His stare was akin to a sharpened blade, cutting through the fog of my confusion and terror. It felt as if he was peering into my very soul. My limbs turned to lead as he approached me. He was unflinching, reaching down to retrieve the fallen can. The silence between us was deafening, a void filled with unspoken questions and unshakable fear. He handed me the can with an effortless gesture, as if the bizarre encounter had never occurred, and then he walked away without uttering a single word. I watched him retreat, his form receding into the labyrinth of shadows, until he was swallowed by the darkness. I was left alone, my heart racing, my thoughts a tumultuous whirlwind. The encounter raised an array of questions in my mind. Why had the man been lurking in that desolate alley? Whom had he been observing with such intensity? And why was he, of all places, near our bakery? I couldn't escape the disquiet that gnawed at me. The stranger's presence and peculiar behavior, combined with those haunting eyes, had left an indelible mark on my psyche. That night, as I surrendered to the realm of dreams, I found myself ensnared in a nightmare. It was a chilling sequence where I fled from the man with the enigmatic ease, yet his relentless gaze followed me, as though I were a mere puppet in his nightmarish theatre. The bitter cold of that dream seeped into my bones, leaving me disoriented and lost. But in the end, it was my mother who emerged as the beacon of salvation in that surreal nightmare. She rescued me from the clutches of the man with the obsidian eyes. I awoke in a cold sweat, grateful for the warmth of my blanket, though the memory of the dream lingered like a specter in the dark corners of my mind. I ached to dismiss the unsettling dream, to attribute it to mere coincidence, but a pervasive unease lingered in my heart. My beloved holiday, Halloween, drew near, and I could not help but wonder if it held any connection to the enigmatic stranger and his chilling eyes. The anticipation for Halloween was palpable, as the quiet town I called home began its transformation. Shop windows came alive with ghoulish candies and eerie figurines of ghosts and zombies, each promising the sweet thrill of the season. My father's bakery, like the others, had taken on a spectral charm, adorned with my handmade pumpkin figures, which cast playful shadows on the walls. Halloween, a time I held dear, was a festival of endless possibilities. My friends and I had charted a course through the town, a map of spooks and frights, where we'd scare our neighbors and, in return, collect the coveted treasure trove of candy. My mother had outdone herself this year, crafting for me a splendid werewolf costume. Its lifelike features filled me with joy, and I couldn't wait to unveil it on the big night. My excitement for the holiday was a beacon of light in the gathering shadows, yet my elation was eclipsed by a looming darkness that stretched its fingers into the heart of our town. The discordant note that intruded upon our festive spirit was the disappearance of one of our own, Dr. Dustin. He was a long-standing pillar of our community, a venerable physician who attended to the town's ailments for as long as anyone could remember. His reputation as a healer had transcended generations, and many had sought his care for years. It was a shock to the core when news of his vanishing swept through town. The search for Dr. Dustin led us to a macabre discovery, a gruesome tableau etched in the annals of our town's history. His severed head and a lone arm were found in a forlorn ditch. The air grew heavy with despair and foreboding as the townsfolk grappled with the unnerving reality. The authorities, in their search for answers, postulated the grim possibility that a wild animal might be responsible for the dismemberment of Dr. Dustin. The rationale seemed plausible at first, invoking eerie tales of nocturnal predators lurking in the woods. But as the investigation unfolded, the horror escalated, and the thin veneer of logic shattered like glass. 2 days later, the town recoiled in sheer horror as another grisly murder came to light. It was Officer Anderson, tasked with the investigation into Dr. Dustin's demise, who had met an equally gruesome fate. His lifeless form, torn and mangled, was discovered in yet another of the town's ditches. The aftermath was a stark testament to a savagery that transcended mere animal instinct. Panic gripped the town like a vice, and fear became the inescapable specter that haunted our streets. Residents clamored for justice, demanding the apprehension and punishment of the malevolent force that had cast its dark shadow over our peaceful abode. The prevailing belief, and a sentiment I couldn't help but share, was that these acts were not the result of a wild beast's savagery. No, it bore the mark of human malevolence, a sinister mind behind the carnage. To ensure the safety of the town's inhabitants, an urgent plea went out, a call to remain vigilant. Homes were fortified with locked doors, and no one dared to venture out alone. Halloween, the holiday that had always been a source of joy and exhilaration, now loomed on the horizon, bearing a chilling weight. As the town quivered beneath the ominous portents, I couldn't help but wonder if the strange man with the piercing black eyes, the enigmatic stranger I had encountered in that eerie alley, held any connection to the unfolding darkness. In the hushed corners of our town, a sinister undercurrent had taken hold, swirling with accusations and suspicions. I, too, was gripped by a conviction that the enigmatic man with the haunting black eyes, who had recently transplanted himself into our tranquil community, bore the mark of the murderer. It seemed I was not alone in my thoughts. The once friendly denizens of our township shared whispers and doubts that echoed my own fears. The man's behavior had taken a malevolent turn. Reports of his clandestine activities, lurking and skulking through the labyrinthine alleys, had become more frequent. There was an undeniable shift in his demeanor, and the rumors that swirled around his past only served to deepen the suspicions. This veil of mistrust cast a long, dark shadow upon the man, painting him as a potential menace. The townsfolk, their fear having long overtaken their previous curiosity, began to ostracize him. One fateful night, someone took it upon themselves to mar the facade of the stranger's residence by scrawling the damning word "murderer" across its front. The man, however, appeared impervious to the town's rebuke. He continued to appear in various parts of our township, often seen walking with a contemplative demeanor or simply standing, his inscrutable gaze fixated on some unknown horizon. A sense of impotence hung heavy in the air, as the town's residents grappled with their powerlessness to bring the enigmatic figure to justice. The police, too, were caught in a web of hesitation, their hands seemingly tied by a lack of substantial evidence. It seemed that even they harbored suspicions regarding the man's involvement in the gruesome murders. My own bewilderment only deepened, fueled by the helplessness I felt in the face of this malevolent presence. As a young man who had spent the entirety of his life in this town, the descent into chaos and fear felt like a surreal nightmare, and I questioned the very essence of the life we had known. But I was not alone in my desperation, as the tension in our town was palpable. Days stretched into nights, with each hour carrying the weight of unspoken terror. The town had become a place of shadows and secrets, where fear, like a relentless tide, threatened to drown any semblance of normalcy. A pervasive sense of dread pervaded every interaction, every glance exchanged among neighbors. Just when it seemed that the darkest chapter of our town's history had been written, a macabre crescendo of terror shattered the fragile peace that remained. Another murder, another life brutally extinguished, sent shockwaves through the community. The discovery of the third victim sent shockwaves through our once tranquil town. The gruesome tableau found in the ditch was a chilling testament to the malevolent force that had descended upon us. The victim's body lay torn asunder, arms and legs severed, entrails and vital organs missing, leaving a gruesome scene that defied explanation. Yet, in stark contrast, the face remained almost untouched, marred only by the absence of one eye, while the other eye retained a haunting gaze of frozen terror. It was Black Eyes. The third victim was the same strange man everyone suspected of the murders. It was a grim revelation that shattered the town's collective certainty. The one who had been cast as the killer had now fallen victim to the same brutality that had terrorized us. The town, once united in suspicion, now faced the harrowing truth. The true murderer still roamed among us, their identity an impenetrable mystery. The uncertainty that had veiled our town in dread, the chilling ambiguity of not knowing which of our neighbors was the remorseless maniac, became more terrifying than the grisly murders themselves. Panic seized our streets as residents grappled with the magnitude of the unknown threat. In their desperation, they began arming themselves and fortifying their homes, a stark departure from the trusting community we once were. Tensions escalated, and the once peaceful town was marred by fights and skirmishes. The police and local authorities found themselves grappling with a situation that was spiraling out of control. Drastic measures were now being considered as the foundations of our town's way of life trembled under the weight of unrelenting fear. In our own home, the pall of fear had settled. My father, ever protective, took precautionary measures, closing our store earlier and discreetly placing an old gun under the counter. My mother, usually an embodiment of warmth and care, now spent more time within the safe confines of our home, working remotely as her sense of unease grew. As for me, I was forbidden to venture outside with my friends, and I sought solace in the digital realm of console games. There, I could temporarily escape the horrors of reality, even if only for a brief respite. Each passing day weighed heavily upon us, as the tendrils of fear dug deeper into our lives. The undeniable truth loomed large. Somewhere among the ordinary residents of our town, an unseen maniac continued to lurk, their identity an enigma that seemed impossible to unravel. It happened the night before the Halloween Day celebration. A potent cocktail of restlessness and rebellion bubbled within me. The confines of our home had become stifling, and my longing for the freedom of the streets had grown insatiable. On that fateful day, my school friend Clive and I hatched a daring plan through whispered phone calls: escape our homes and rendezvous at one of the abandoned houses that stood sentinel in our town. The idea was simple: gather a group of kids, gather rocks, and, in an act of misguided bravery, shatter the windows of the house belonging to the enigmatic man who had cast a shadow of fear over our lives. I was plagued by memories of the strange man with the haunting black eyes, an encounter etched in the depths of my mind like an indelible scar. Revenge against the fear that had gripped me seemed enticing, and so, I set out to confront my own terrors. As I left my home, making my way to the appointed meeting place, I was met with an unexpected sight. A lone Clive stood there. He relayed the disappointing news that our other friends had failed to escape the watchful eyes of their parents. Although my initial excitement was tempered by the absence of a group, I resolved to proceed with our audacious plan. The day drew nearer to evening, casting long shadows that heralded the arrival of Halloween. Armed with a pocket full of rocks, we marched toward the foreboding house. As we approached its grim facade, Clive, ever the instigator, began to plant the seed of a reckless idea in my mind. He suggested that we venture inside and explore the house, his words dripping with mockery. He goaded me, labeling me a coward, and, in my desperation to prove my courage, I agreed to accompany him. Clive assured me that we were safe, for the owner of the house, the strange man himself, was dead. His words provided little solace, but I trudged forward, the gnawing fear in my chest urging me to push onward. The house loomed ahead, and we climbed through a shattered window, our entry into the darkness marked by the haunting creak of splintered wood. Inside, a suffocating stillness enveloped us, broken only by the echoes of our own hushed breaths. The house felt like a tomb, its silence broken only by our tentative footsteps. Dust hung thick in the air, and I couldn't help but notice the impressions of heavy police boots etched into the floor. My father's conversations had once hinted at a police search, their futile attempts to unearth secrets hidden within these very walls. I felt a growing unease that I couldn't explain, an irrational fear that clung to me like a shadow. In my apprehension, I edged closer to Clive. My silent plea for reassurance met only with his sly amusement. He mocked my unease, enjoying the power his taunts held over me. We continued to navigate the dark, labyrinthine halls, the oppressive silence feeding our anxiety. It was then that Clive stumbled upon an unexpected discovery. A hiding place concealed behind a weathered wooden frame. Within the hidden nook lay a small box. It was filled with photographs. As Clive and I delved into the box of photographs hidden within the eerie house, we were confronted with a collection of memories and faces from the past. Some pictures were aged in grayscale, while others were captured in vivid color. The people in these images appeared entirely ordinary, yet an unsettling sensation nagged at the edge of my consciousness. It was as though they bore secrets, lurking just beneath the surface, secrets that eluded my understanding. Among the array of images, one picture held a curious allure, an image of a dense forest with a young girl in a dress standing beside a massive gray canine. The girl's beauty was undeniable, her presence hauntingly familiar, yet frustratingly beyond my ability to recall. I struggled to place her in my memory, but the puzzle remained incomplete. Clive, however, seemed to recognize the girl immediately, his surprise evident in the glint of his eyes. He gazed at me, a sly smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He quipped, "Have you been so paralyzed by fear that you've forgotten the glaringly obvious, Sean? Don't you recognize her?" Before I could respond to Clive's taunts, the chilling symphony of an unfamiliar sound reached our ears. We turned in unison, our eyes locking onto the window, through which a shadowy figure had suddenly materialized. Dread swelled in my chest, and the picture slipped from my trembling fingers as I bolted toward the window, desperate to escape the encroaching terror. Clive raced after me, our collective panic propelling us toward the exit. Yet, as we approached the window through which we had earlier infiltrated the house, it became painfully evident that we were not alone in our quest to exit. The sound of shattering glass followed us, like an ominous herald of our impending doom. Without hesitation, I hurled myself out of the window, landing in a painful heap on the ground below. Ignoring the jolt of pain, I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing, and my instincts screaming for me to flee. Clive followed suit, his breaths labored as we bolted away from the accursed house. As our footsteps carried us to the safety of the park, its thick canopy of trees offered a shield against the darkness that now enveloped the town. Our hearts pounded, and fear clung to us like a shroud. As we wandered around the stranger's house, we didn't notice that night had fallen, and now we were being pursued by an unknown person. The malevolent figure that had stalked our town, leaving death in its wake, was now, it seemed, chasing us. We collapsed against a tree, our breaths ragged, our eyes wide with terror. The unknown hunted us, and we were left with no answers, only the certainty that danger lurked in the shadows. Clive was injured when he jumped out of the window. He accidentally scraped his leg on the broken glass. I didn't pay any attention to it because I was so scared. But when we stopped for a break, I noticed that his mangled limb was covered in blood. The sight of the bloody leg made me sick. I couldn't help myself and vomited violently. My stomach revolted at the disgusting stench of blood and broken glass. I started coughing uncontrollably. Then, an icy chill gripped my body, and searing pain radiated through my chest and into my head. My vision blurred as tears welled up, and I collapsed to my knees, writhing in torment. Through the haze of pain, I glimpsed a tall, shadowy figure approaching. Her eyes, like those of a wild beast, glowed with a predatory intensity. Just before unconsciousness swallowed me, her presence loomed large, and I felt as though I was prey awaiting a predator's strike. When I finally regained consciousness, I found myself lying with my head resting on my mother's lap. Her loving and tender gaze met mine. Confusion overcame me, and I stammered, "Mom?" She stroked my head gently and remained silent. As I attempted to rise, dizziness washed over me, and I realized that I was completely naked, as was my mother. Unease gnawed at me, and I questioned how we had ended up exposed to the night's cold embrace. My mother's silence lingered, and with a heavy sigh, she handed me a photograph. It was the same image Clive and I had found in the eerie house, a young girl standing beside a massive gray wolf. Recognition struck me like a thunderbolt, and I struggled to understand the connection. "Where is Clive?" I asked, my voice trembling. My mother continued to fix her unwavering gaze upon me, her lips curving into an enigmatic smile. It was then that I noticed her sharp, elongated fangs glistening in the moonlight. A sense of unease settled over me as she began to speak, revealing a long-hidden family secret. "You recognize the girl in the picture, Sean," she said softly. "Do not doubt it. That girl is me, your mother, captured when I was just 14 or 15 years old, many years ago. And standing beside me is not just a wolf, but your grandfather, Sean. This is his true form." Her unsettling smile and the revelation of her true nature left me deeply uneasy. Summoning my inner strength, I mustered the courage to ask my mother once more about Clive's fate. Her joyous smile waned, replaced by a solemn expression. She raised her hand and pointed to a horrifying sight nearby. Following the direction of her hand, my eyes locked onto the remains of Clive. It was a grisly sight, a grotesque testament to a gruesome fate. What remained of my dear friend lay there, mutilated and lifeless. The sight struck a deep chord of revulsion and fear within me, and I couldn't contain the sudden surge of nausea that overcame me. I instinctively covered my mouth, but it was too late. The acrid taste of bile and the stench of death permeated the air. I had begun to piece together the terrible events that had transpired. A nightmarish recollection clawed its way to the forefront of my mind, and the vile memories flooded over me. The revelation that I had been involved in such horror sent shivers down my spine, causing me to vomit once again. My mother, her hand gently caressing my head, addressed the awful truth, her words laden with remorse and responsibility. "You're beginning to remember, Sean. I couldn't reach you in time, and it was your hunger that took Clive's life. I failed to stop you, and I carry that burden of responsibility. But our power and our insatiable hunger can be tamed, even in one so young as you. I'll teach you, guide you through this." Her smile returned, imbued with the warmth of a mother's love, reassuring me that, despite the horrifying ordeal, everything would be okay. But as the haunting memories of the town's gruesome murders and the eerie man with the ominous black eyes resurfaced, I couldn't help but confront my curiosity. I turned to my mother, seeking answers about the mysterious man. Her expression shifted to one of sadness as she began to reveal the unsettling truth. "This man was a hunter," she explained, "one of those who sought individuals like us, my mother, my grandfather, and now, myself. They existed within the world as predators, relentlessly tracking their quarry. It was the reason our world was far from safe," she cautioned. My mother's voice quivered as she continued, explaining that I must safeguard our secret. If our truth were ever to be discovered by a doctor or a lawman, it would surely pique the interest of the malevolent hunter with those piercing black eyes. A solemn reality hung in the air as she confided, "We may need to leave this town, the place we've come to cherish." In that moment, my mother unraveled more enigmatic threads of our family's history. She disclosed that she hailed from a secluded village in France, her origins veiled in secrecy and obscurity. My father, she assured me, was a regular man who, despite being privy to my mother's unique nature, protected and loved her without judgment. A flicker of hope ignited within me as I grappled with the complexities of my family's reality. As my mother shared these revelations, a sinister truth took root within my psyche. On October 31st, each year, our strength burgeoned, but our insatiable hunger became an uncontrollable force. It was a day when the boundary between the living and the deceased blurred, a day when death itself seemed to cast its dark veil over the world. The newfound understanding of my lineage and our extraordinary nature left me with a profound sense of unease, a darkness that seemed to linger despite the warmth of my mother's love.